At the start of this pandemic, there was a legislator in Michigan that was not very happy with our governor's executive order initially about locking things down and so on and so forth. And when one of the other legislators who was from the Detroit area, or maybe even Detroit proper, mentioned about the situation that was going on in Detroit at that time, which was really serious. Detroit was a hotbed for the coronavirus for quite some time at the very beginning, in the March, April, May timeline. And this legislator from the other side of the state basically said, and I know that I'm paraphrasing, that, well, that's not happening here. In essence, this legislator was from a predominantly white area, whereas the legislator from Detroit was, I don't want to say obviously, but he was in a more of a black area. And so that really got me thinking about pandemics in general and how they've affected not just us as a society, but especially those people of color, and how, being a part of that pandemic as a person of color can exacerbate the entire situation, because there's a whole variety of factors that, and when I'm talking about factors, I'm talking about a variety of racial disparities that become factors, both in not just a cultural sense, but also in environmental sense. There's and that really hit home with me because during the pandemic, throughout the pandemic, the people that have been mostly affected are Black and Indigenous people of color and people of color. If you look at the Navajo Nation, they become an epicenter. You look at the situations in cities like Detroit and Miami and so on. Goes on and on. And the racial disparities are economic, they're environmental, all that stuff. And it brings me to 3 instances in our country's history in which this is where this situation, and also being overly cautious of the medical system in its forms as well, and how the medical systems and situations that people of color have faced will give them an ounce, maybe even more than an ounce, a gallon of skepticism, skeptibility is probably not a word, but skepticism about not just treating this pandemic or treating this situation for these people, but getting access to the appropriate care. But not only that, but trust in the system and the doctors and nurses themselves. And there's instances that really hit home in this regard. And it goes back to the 1750s when the first case, I believe, of biological warfare was instituted in the French Indian War, or at least on the cusp of the French and Indian War, in which blankets that were injected with smallpox, blankets and medical supplies injected with smallpox, were given to Indian people. And even though it's not conclusive whether that was an effective form, I mean, there was some effect, because it was, right then, smallpox was highly contagious. Very contagious. There was no cure for it at that point in time. But it's not just that. Indian people did not have the immunities to any of the airborne transferable diseases and bacteria that Europeans were bringing over. Point blank. They just did not have it. Why? Because it did not exist on this continent in which they were here first. And so therefore, this right here, giving medical supplies and blankets to Indian people by medical staff, right there, given diseased, right there, trust, gone, out the window. And then another aspect of it is in the 20th century, when a syphilis experiment was conducted on Black Americans at Tuskegee Institute, which was in Alabama, deep south, and this went on for 50 years, in which they were asked to subject themselves to this, syphilis, the sexually transmitted disease, and they were told, well, you get free health care for life. And that health care did not happen. We'll just say that. It just did not happen. And it happened for 50 straight years. Early 30s to the early 70s. I'm sorry, that's not 30, that's 40. Still, I'm not a math guy. So, and lastly, we have what is a water crisis. I know that I'm just using 3 instances in which the medical systems and the environmental systems in our country have really been very, very catered away from people of color. And right now, water, safe drinking water, a situation in which, seeing it with the proximity of where most Americans are when it comes to waterways and lakes and rivers, even the Great Lakes, there's people, even in Michigan, that do not have safe drinking water. Ridiculous. But it's all part of that environmental racism. I mean, there's ways to get. In fact, there's a Mexican community that works on the orange groves in Southern California, who live next to the aqueducts that feed fresh water to these oranges. Yet the workers that work them do not have safe drinking water in their own homes. And this is what's really the bottom line situation here, is the simple fact that we, as Americans, together need to make sure that all of the folks that we have get these basic drinking water. Is basic. It's a basic right. It should not be doled out and asked for later. I mean, even with the Flint crisis that is still ongoing. There's kids that are going to have lead poisoning in their blood for generations and pass it down through their family. And this could be completely avoided by not using contaminated water instead and going from the Great Lakes where it was initially. This is ridiculous. These are the situations that really burn me up, for the simple fact that, the people of color who are 9 times out of 10, well, I don't want to give that. It's like who are majority of frontline workers. They are retail, they are nurses, healthcare, that type of stuff, being on the front lines of this pandemic in the major cities. And it just really, really burns me up that we are not considering. However, it shouldn't be surprising. That's our history of not considering other human beings' lives in the midst of this, not taking the proper precautions to curb this, because it obviously is not a black and white thing or a brown and white thing. This is a pandemic. This is bacteria. This is virus. These are all these things that our bodies have to fight off. And all of us are humans, so we can get infected. It does not matter if you are a Native American, if you're a white person, or a Mexican or black person. It doesn't matter. Yet, what does matter, or what is thought that mattered, is that, oh, they are expendable. And that's what I saw. When this pandemic first, I was just drawn to those situations, from Tuskegee to smallpox, now to the water crisis, now to the pandemic. Because these populations, especially, the Native American nation, the Navajo nation, was hit really, really, really hard, and it obviously trickles to others. But I've never not had access to clean drinking water. I have never not had access to good medical care. I thought I haven't. I mean, for a long time I didn't have health insurance and I didn't trust going to the doctor. But that's just me being prideful and ignorant. I don't have a history of being injected with diseases, and I don't have a family member that's been injected with diseases or could have been injected with diseases and then told, oh, don't worry, we'll take care of you. Who do you trust in that situation? Who do you trust? I don't have those issues. Never have. And I can't even fathom having to deal with not having clean drinking water or water to wash with. And then, on top of that, being charged for it. Water that's toxic, being charged for it. These are the times we are still living in. There's no reason why we can't have clean drinking water for everybody. That's no longer left unsaid. See you next time.